Chapter 18. Rafi nearly choked on a scream as she stepped out of her tent. River was standing right there. "Sorry," he said quickly, hands up in a gesture of apology. "Didn't mean to startle you." "What are you doing here?" Rafi asked. "Just chilling." This was the downside of Rafi's tent being right next to River's. Yes, she had access to him, but he also had access to her, and she wondered how long he'd been standing outside her flimsy fabric door and just how much he'd heard of her recording. River answered the question before she could ask it. "I heard you talking to yourself." She could feel her cheeks reddening, but coughed to try to disperse the color. She gauged River's face for any telltale signs that he'd heard what she'd said about him, but he only looked at her with that doofy smile of his. Maybe he'd only heard indistinct mumbling? "I was recording an episode for my podcast." Rafi held her breath, waiting for him to say something, confront her, but he did none of that. "What did you hear exactly?" "Something about detergent," he said. Rafi let out a sigh through her nose, relieved he hadn't heard the meatier parts of the episode. "Yeah, just wishing I could wash my clothes." River nodded, which was a perfectly normal response to what Rafi had just said, but there was something uncanny about his expression. In the short time she'd gotten to know him, Rafi had become accustomed to River's way of speaking, which was to say he liked doing it, liked to chit-chat, liked to make little jokes to smooth out the hard edges of any conversation, but he remained silent now, the doofy smile slipping subtly from his face. Being this close to him, under his gaze, reminded Rafi of what she really thought of him. River was dangerous. "You want to go somewhere?" he asked. The question was so unexpected, it took a minute for Rafi to respond. "Where?" "Just this place I know." He shrugged his bare shoulders. "A secret place." All Rafi wanted was alone time with River so she could get to the bottom of her case. But was she willing to risk her life, going to a secret place with a killer, a possible serial killer? "Lead the way." Okay, technically Rafi said she wouldn't blindly follow him, but all investigators had to make some sacrifices to crack their cases. She practically had an obligation to do this, an obligation to her listeners, to Tracy and Sierra and Hella, and to the truth. Rafi was brave. She was in awe of herself, really, and that was why her heart was beating so fast. Not because she was afraid, and not because she was out of shape, and the uphill journey was leaving her kind of winded. It was the adrenaline. With every new step, she felt closer to the truth. She would ask him her burning questions. She would corner him, confront him, bear down until he broke down. It wasn't her who should be afraid for not knowing what lay ahead. It was him. Unlike the other times she'd hung out with River, when there was always the constant hum of human life in the distance, it was as they walked through the lush jungle trees now that Rafi realized they were truly alone for the first time. The rest of the beach, the people, the island fell away, and all Rafi could hear was the crisp sound of twigs snapping under their feet and fat leaves whacking their arms. They were thick in the middle of the island, but they'd taken a detour from climbing up the jagged slope of the mountain, going around it instead, and River was evasive. Anytime Rafi asked where they were going, River would give her a vague, "You'll see soon enough," and then he'd do something infuriating, like turn to her and smile, and the beat of her heart would stumble over itself. And no, it wasn't because he was cute. It was never because he was cute. None of him was cute. She would not be distracted by his deep brown eyes or the crinkle they got around the corners or the way all his teeth lined up perfectly and gleamed or the way his lone dimple popped. Well, she couldn't deny he was fit. She watched the way his back moved as he walked, his shoulder blades sharp as wings about to break through skin, the elegant indentation of his spine and his thighs. It was pretty obvious that River did not skip leg day at the gym. His thighs were thicker than she expected and only sparsely hairy. "Wait," she stopped. "Why are your pants off?" "Because we're here." I felt like that doesn't adequately answer the question, but her comment died on her lips as she took in her surrounding. A pond, right in the middle of the jungle. Beautiful and clear for at least a yard beneath the surface, burbling at the far end with a waterfall splashing off the side of the mountain. Sunlight bounced off the crystal liquid surface, casting a shimmering rainbow on the waterfall's spray of mist. Even the birds seemed astounded by the unbelievable sight, chirping a soundtrack to welcome Rafi and River. This was the most amazing place Rafi had ever been. And to her left was River, whose pants had gone the way of his girlfriends and disappeared. He was left in nothing but boxers, and though Rafi was fully dressed, she felt equally as exposed with a deep flush crawling up her cheeks. She told herself it was because of the humidity. "I brought you here because of what I heard you saying in your tent." Rafi's mouth went dry instantly. She had a talent for assessing situations quickly, and she now saw the scene before her for exactly what it was. River had heard her recording her podcast, probably the whole episode. He'd brought her here to a place no one on the island knew about, so no one could find them, just as she'd suspected. And he'd taken off his clothes, so as not to dirty them with all the blood he would surely be spilling. "You said something about wishing you had detergent?" River said. "Oh. And I know you don't have a change of clothing, because if you did, you would have definitely changed out of that shirt by now." Not that it's not a nice shirt, but it's also not a great shirt, you know? But what do I know about fashion? I have stylists who tell me what to wear. Sorry, it's a nice shirt, and it definitely doesn't hurt my eyes with how pink it is. Anyway, I figured this was the next best thing. He gestured toward the pond. Fresh water. It sure beats bathing in the salty ocean. River didn't want to kill her. He wanted her to take a bath. And he was apparently part of a long list of people who hated her shirt. Bringing her to a bath was the equivalent of offering someone a breath mint. There was no way to take that other than as a clear sign that you stink. She tried surreptitiously to sniff her armpit, and not surreptitiously enough, because River chuckled. I'm not trying to say you smell bad, he said quickly. I just thought you might appreciate this place. I do appreciate it. Usually when speaking to River, every word out of her mouth was disingenuous, but she wasn't lying this time. This place was beautiful. And yet, I can't go in there. The pond was stunning, but it was deep, and she couldn't. Because of your fear of water? Rafi turned to River, his words so surprising that they were enough to steal her attention away from the awesome landscape. How did you know? Rafi, there's a reason why Australian lasses picked me as their favorite artist last year, and it isn't my looks. What? It's my empathy. It's what makes me such a good musician. I'm perceptive. I understand people. And your water phobia was immediately obvious to me. Tell me about it. Rafi stared at him, not sure what to think, but she wasn't going to just start opening up to him about one of the most terrifying moments of her life. She wasn't here to reveal something about herself. She was here to make him reveal something about himself. But River watched her with a look so piercing and patient that the rest of her surroundings fell away. Maybe Australian lasses knew what they were talking about. I almost drowned, Rafi said, when I was 8. Family vacation. We were at the beach, and I was in the water alone for some reason. I went out too far. There was a wave so big, at least as tall as my father, and it just went right over my head. It took me under. I couldn't figure out which way was up. That must have been scary. Rafi shrugged and shook her head, mostly to try to shirk the memory away. She didn't like dwelling on it too much. I survived. You're very brave, River said. For not drowning? For being here. You willingly chose to come to this island, a place surrounded by nothing but miles of ocean. There must have been a real good reason for you to do that. Rafi took in what River said. There was a good reason she came here. And while Fly Fest may have been a bust for everyone else, this place was tailor-made for just what she needed. And he was standing right here beside her. She liked the idea of them both being in the water. There wasn't anywhere for River to go when she'd eventually ask him what she needed to ask him. She would jump into this, no fear, and that was just what she did. Chapter 19. Rafi popped her head out of the water, gasping and shivering. Not since she was 8 years old had she been so perfectly encased in the thing she feared the most. She was frozen with it, and she had to remember what it entailed to stay afloat. She kicked her feet and tried to pull herself up with her arms, but there was nothing to hold on to, of course. She wanted to scream, but her gasp had turned into hyperventilation. Plus, there was the pesky problem of all the water pouring into her mouth. This was how it would all end, she realized. She'd survived her secret detour with a possible serial killer only to die by a little bit of water. Said possible serial killer bobbed his head right out of that water as rosy-tinged and carefree as a cranberry in a bog. When he saw Rafi, however, the smile on his face slid a bit. You know how to swim, right? She tried to tell him she'd known how to swim since she was 4 years old, but through all her splashing and flailing, it was hard to get the word out. River seemed to get the message, though, and his patented smile was back, secure as ever. May I? He asked. He placed his hands on Rafi's hips and held her gaze just as strongly as he held her up. She could see his feet kicking below, but like a duck, he was totally composed above the surface. He nodded, prompting her, and she began to mimic him, kicking her own feet, breathing again. She didn't think it'd be possible, submerged in all this water, but her nerves settled down. The fact that she was in this pond was amazing and shocking, but suddenly secondary to the fact that River was touching her. Knowing what she knew about him, she should have recoiled, but she did not want to. Don't let go, Rafi said. Her voice sounded ragged, and she realized just how much water she'd inadvertently swallowed. I'm barely holding on. Rafi looked down. It was just his fingertips on her. How was he possibly holding her up with only his fingertips? You're so strong, she said without an ounce of irony. Yes, I am, River said without irony either, but you're also floating on your own. I am? River let go completely, and Rafi did not sink, even though he looked at her with eyes that could make anyone forget how to breathe. See, you're a pro. River did not hold her again, but as they swam in the pond, they remained in each other's orbits as though tethered together below the surface. Rafi didn't know what to expect to happen what she expected to happen when she jumped in, but she realized it wasn't so scary here after all. The water felt incredible, almost as warm as a bath and silky on her skin. It made the turquoise blue ocean seem harsh to the touch and abrasively salty in comparison. Being here with River was kind of fun too. He swam like a sea lion released from captivity, but with the muscle memory for performing in front of large crowds. He dove and twirled and splashed, and when he popped back up through the surface of the water, he did that thing that boys with a certain length of hair did, where they whip it so that strands stick sideways and wet to their foreheads. Like on stage, River loved to perform. He made a big show of climbing up the rocks on the side of the waterfall, then jumping off in a massive cannonball. He invited Rafi to do the same, but there was no way. If she attempted to climb on slippery rocks, she would probably fall and crack open her skull, and she wasn't about to become inspo for River's next album. It was as she thought of this that Rafi remembered why she was here. Now that she'd conquered her fear, she was ready to conquer the truth. Rafi watched River swim back toward the spot where they'd left their things. The muscles in his back flexed as he planted his arms on the flat rock and hoisted himself out of the water. He went for the pocket of his pants and rummaged for something inside. The loudness of the waterfall filled Rafi's ears as she watched and helplessly treaded water. What was he getting? A knife? A gun? A candlestick? But why a weapon, when all he had to do was dunk her if he wanted to? Teigan, his big hands pressed them into her head and shoulders, held her down until her thoughts all vanished when she saw him holding a rectangular white object, small enough to fit in his palm, but substantial enough to cause blunt force trauma, except it wasn't a stone or a brick or a weapon at all. Rafi gasped. Is that soap? Yep. He dove back in and Rafi winced at the splash. But when she opened her eyes again, River was just a couple of feet away from her, lathering up his shoulders. Where did you get that? Rafi didn't bother to hide the awe coloring her tone. Some girl gave it to me. Girls give me a lot of things. Rafi was aware of the skeevy business of girls fawning over rock stars and gifting them things, and how ethically dubious it was for River to accept gifts, especially since this was a small island and he was likely to see that girl again and she might expect something from him, or worse, he might expect even more from her. But all those things flitted away to make room for the scent of freshness emanating from the most beautiful rectangular block Rafi had ever laid eyes on. Somehow, her palm was opening up like a lotus flower and the sudsy, slippery bar was landing on it. Keep it, River said. Someone will give me another one. Rafi finally understood what was behind River's easygoing, sunny disposition. He never had to worry about anything, because everything in his life always worked itself out. He didn't worry about being stranded on an island because, as a celebrity, he knew that eventually he would have to be saved. He didn't worry about staying clean because someone would always give him soap. And he didn't have to worry about getting away with murder, since he already had. It was an eloquent thought, if Rafi did say so herself, the kind she might jot down to use later in her podcast. But it was canceled out now how inelegantly she was scrubbing a bar of soap under her arm, but over her shirt. She scrubbed everywhere, her hair, her mouth, her jean shorts. She must have looked like an alien who'd been told about soap, but who'd never seen it used in practice. And River chuckled as he watched her have at it. But Rafi didn't care if she looked ridiculous. She'd never felt so clean. When they were done swimming and washing and rinsing off, they dried off by lying out in the sun on the big rock slab at the edge of the pond. River was a lounging marble statue. Water droplets dotted his skin in some parts and casually rolled off in others like summer rain on a slick leaf. Rafi, on the other hand, was a soaked, year-old newspaper you find in your gutter and fling unceremoniously onto the street, where it turns into soggy mulch. She glanced over at River and wished she could look so relaxed, or at the very least presentable, but all she could think to do was to bend her knee. Was this relaxed? Did this look sexy? Why was she worried about looking sexy? River opened his eyes, catching Rafi staring at him, and she immediately darted her gaze up to the sky. She propped herself on her elbow and tilted her head back and tried to whip her hair away from her face, but she almost broke her neck doing so. She dropped the elbow, closed her eyes, definitely not sexy. But who cared? Rafi didn't ever care about looking sexy, not for anybody and definitely not for a serial killer, which reminded her it was time to get on with it. When River serenely faced the sun and closed his eyes again, Rafi slipped her hand into her backpack and felt for her microphone. She always had her mic within reach. It made her brave, gave her a voice. And if she was able to record River's confession without him knowing, then even if he killed her like he did all the other girls in his life, at least the truth would come out when they eventually found her body, if anyone found her body. She clasped the mic and she hit record. Time for the interview of her life. So that's pretty nice weather we're having, huh? River did nothing for a long moment. Then he turned his gaze toward Rafi. He caught her eyes like he had a net, and she found herself unable to break free of it. You don't really want to talk about the weather. It wasn't a question, and the way he'd said it unnerved Rafi. Maybe it was because he'd read her mind. This wasn't what she wanted to talk about at all. She'd been gearing herself up to have the talk with him. The one about how he was a murderer, etc. It was like he was giving her an invitation to do so without even knowing it, but his net eyes caught her tongue too, and Rafi didn't know what to say, so he helped her along. I'm glad you came out here with me. I wanted to talk to you about something too. Oh? About the thing I heard you say in your tent? River said. About the detergent? About me being a killer? Rafi went so still, she wasn't even sure she was breathing. The waterfall roared in the distance and the pond burbled and birds tweeted. They were the kind of sounds that people selected on noise machines to help them drift off to sleep. But to Rafi, it all sounded like alarm bells. Like the musical cues in a horror movie when the villain is about to strike. What? Her mouth was suddenly dry. You think I killed Tracy. I heard you say it. The damning words did not match his even-keeled disposition. Rafi hated that he was so calm while she felt so off-kilter. She was the one who wanted to have this conversation, and somehow he was the one steering the ship. If you think I'm a killer, then why follow me into the jungle? Alone? Where no one knows where we are? What are you saying? I'm saying that no one would be able to hear you scream. There was none of that cinnamon roll pop star charm gleaming off of him, not even the hint of a smile, just an unwavering stare down. Rafi had to fight not to wither beneath it. Maybe if she said it out loud, she could convince him and herself that she could meet this moment. I came because I'm not afraid of you. Rafi's elbow dug painfully into the rock as she tried to remain still and composed. And yes, I do think you're a killer. River sat up, the movement catching Rafi off guard, but he didn't stop moving. He leaned over her and she froze, unsure what to do, but knowing this was the moment. This was the moment River buried this story. If Rafi was a mouse, then River was the snake, slithering seamlessly toward her, about to swallow her whole. But even as a mouse, Rafi was awkward and strange because she didn't try to scamper away. It was almost as if a part of her wanted this. River was fully on top of her, his dry, smooth body over her still damp one. All Rafi could do was let her elbow fall, and she lay back looking up at him. Her rough shirt exacerbated the friction between them. When she was in the pond with him, she liked the idea that he had nowhere to hide. Now his face was only inches from hers. She saw the pores around his nose and a scar she'd never noticed on his chin. The tip of one of his incisors was whiter than the rest of his tooth. This close, he had nowhere to hide. Tracy didn't just disappear, Rafi said. Her voice was steady as she said the most important thing she would ever say. Maybe the last thing she would ever say. And she didn't run away. She's dead, isn't she? Every second passed achingly slowly as River did nothing but look at her. His glance darted first to her lips, then one eye, and the other, until finally he nodded. He was reaching his hand out. It was coming for Rafi's neck. He was going to kill her. Chapter 20. And then his hand passed her neck. It passed her face. It went for the backpack she'd left next to her head. He reached inside and took out her mic. If you want the truth, it needs to be off the record. River clicked the off button, and Rafi felt like it was her heart that had stopped, but she was alive. River tossed her the mic and she sat up, catching it. Wait, what just happened? She was sure River had almost killed her or wanted to kill her. Why hadn't he killed her? River sat cross-legged, shoulders slumped and kind of sad. Tracy didn't abandon me in the middle of the bush like I claimed. She died out there. But I didn't kill her, I swear. Rafi couldn't believe what she was hearing, and she couldn't believe that her mic was turned off. But more importantly, she just wanted the truth, and River was ready to spill it. So, what happened? River let go of such a big breath it almost looked like he got physically smaller. We went to the bush on a romantic trip. We wanted to sleep under the stars. I mean, we didn't even pack a tent, that's how much we were roughing it. We got there late, and by the time we were done settling in, it was already dark. Tracy spotted these purple wildflowers and she wanted to collect them. She said they'd be perfect for a photo she wanted to post. I told her to just wait till tomorrow, but she wanted them that instant. And then, the whole time he talked, he'd been looking at his hands, tearing at tiny threads of skin on his cuticles. But now he stopped and looked at Rafi like he'd just remembered that she was there. The next part is not going to sound real. Rafi was impatient. She didn't want him to stop and editorialize or even acknowledge her. She just wanted him to let it all out without interruption. She wished she was in a sound booth, a small windowless room, dim and intimate without distractions, but the wilderness would have to do. In her mind, the burbling waterfall and tweeting tropical birds were white noise, providing an ambient cocoon of privacy in which she hoped River could speak freely. Unless you tell me that aliens showed up to abduct her, I will believe you. River seemed to think about this, a horrified, faraway look in his eyes as he contemplated extraterrestrials. Rafi was worried she was losing him. River, focus. What happened? River looked at his fingers once more. He tore away his skin until a tiny bead of blood bloomed on the corner of his thumbnail. A pack of dingoes showed up. If there had been a desk in front of her, Rafi would have dropped her head onto it. She may have even acted out the motion without realizing it, because River said, "See, I knew you'd think it was ridiculous." Because it was ridiculous. Dingoes? Rafi didn't know what to say. All she knew about dingoes was that they were basically dogs with stupid names and a punchline to a joke. "I'm serious," River said. The leader of the pack bit Tracy on the forearm and dragged her behind this rocky hill formation thing. And she was already pretty far from camp when it happened, but I ran as fast as I could to help her. But when I went behind the hill, the dingoes, they were all gone. Rafi sat with this information. She said she'd believe him, but now she had serious doubts. River looked contrite. The boy was practically on the verge of tears, but dingoes? If this is all true, then why didn't you just tell everyone that from the beginning? "Because who would believe it?" River said. "No one believed that real-life story with the lady who said the dingo took her baby, and then it became a Meryl Streep movie, and then they remade the movie with Ashley Woodstone, and it came out literally a week before Tracy died, and it was just the worst possible timing, and it's just... I went on that trip with my girlfriend. If I left alone and told everyone that a dingo had eaten her, I would have been arrested on the spot or laughed at." "Arrested or laughed at?" Rafi snorted. "Which is worse?" "I'm serious, Rafi. If I told the truth, that would have been it for me. My music career over before it even began. I couldn't do that to myself. I had already started writing my album. Imagine what the world would look like today if nobody ever got to hear it." Sometimes talking to River felt like an out-of-body experience. Rafi was at once in the moment having a serious conversation with a boy about his dead girlfriend and simultaneously coming to terms with the fact that River's autobiography may as well have been a book of Mad Libs. Shirtless pop star in the middle of the jungle explains how dingoes ate his girlfriend. "A world without your music," Rafi responded, continuing the conversation instead of walking out of the jungle and directly into the ocean. Perish the thought. "I know. So you made up the story about Tracy running away?" River nodded. "And you wrote fake diary entries for her where you made her look like an awful person who was always planning on leaving you stranded in the middle of the bush?" He nodded again. "So you were never going to propose?" "Crikey, no. I was 17. I just put that in there to make the story more heartbreaking. And it worked. It worked so well, Raf." He was getting emotional again, and Rafi was almost embarrassed for him. It was the only way she knew how to classify what she was feeling. It certainly wasn't pity, and she didn't have the energy to spare anger for something this idiotic. "I feel so guilty," River said, "and the only way I know how to deal with it is through your music." "No, I donate all my money to the Australian Dingo Conservation Society, even though that feels totally wrong and not the right charity to give to, but I don't know what is, Rafi. I don't know what is. They buy chew toys for the dingoes, so at least that's training them to chew toys and not humans, right?" There was a desperate hope in his voice that Rafi, frankly, did not know how to assuage. "Right?" River asked again, his eyes turning into pools large enough to rival the one behind them. "Australia is like a different planet, River. I don't know how things work there." River sighed, his chin perpendicular to his chest. "My whole life is so stupid." Rafi nodded until she realized what she was doing and stopped. She hated to admit it, but for the first time ever, she believed River. As he'd spoken, Rafi examined his mouth for any twitch of crookedness, any indication that he might be lying, but there was none. He was giving it to her straight, literally. His mouth was straight. So she had to believe his words too. His story was too ridiculous to be false. And it meant that she'd been right all along. Well, not about River killing Tracy, but she'd been the only one to see that he'd been lying about the whole story, and he'd falsified documents to cover it all up. That, at least, gave Rafi some validation. But validation was not the same as being satisfied. And though she'd gotten to the bottom of the case, Rafi felt a pang, an emptiness. She needed something else, something more. "What about Sierra?" Rafi said. "I know you lied to me about her. I found her necklace in your things." River's lips tightened. Around a groan, he was trying not to let out. There was just so much to explain, and none of it made him look like the good guy he was desperate to present himself as. "People give me things all the time, and then she goes and disappears. I lied because I can't be known as the guy whose girls disappear around all the time. So you don't know where she is?" "No clue." "And Hella?" "I have no idea why people think she's here, but she's not." River wrapped his knuckles on the rock he was sitting on with increasing frustration. "Please swear you'll never tell anyone any of this. I know my music is really good, but deep down, I wonder if people only like me because of my sob story." "Wouldn't you want to know for sure?" Rafi asked. River's shoulders rose by barely a centimeter. "I just want people to like me." All this time, in the hierarchy of the influencers on this island, Rafi thought River was above it all. He wasn't trying to shill anything like everyone else here. He wasn't obsessed with his phone and his brand and putting on a certain image. But now, she knew he cared about that stuff more than anyone else here. At the core, River was just like everybody else. He was selling a story, desperately hoping you looked anywhere but at the real him. So, you believe me? Rafi considered herself a good judge of character, someone who could always tell if a person was lying, and every bone in her body told her that River was telling the truth about Tracy. It was funny. The truth was all Rafi ever wanted, so why did it feel like socks on Christmas morning, a gift she didn't particularly want and could hardly muster up the appreciation for? The truth of River's case was boring, and worse, off the record. She couldn't talk about it on her podcast, and if she did, he'd never confirm it. Ironically enough, Rafi couldn't tell the real story for the exact same reason River concealed the truth too. No one would believe the absurdity of a pack of dingoes killing a girl. Rafi saw her podcast, her pending deal with Steercat Media, her dream of becoming a famous investigative reporter, all disappearing into thin air. Poof. She couldn't let all her dreams go that easy, not without a fight. The only way she saw out of this mess was to hold on to some versions of River's truth and not the others. She could choose to believe that River was telling the truth about Tracy's disappearance, but not Sierra's. Her story was still too much of a mystery and happening in real time, with Rafi right in the thick of it. A new case for Rafi to pursue. I believe you, Rafi said. What she didn't say was that she still didn't have enough information to believe him in regards to Sierra's disappearance, which meant he was still a suspect. And just like that, Rafi had a new mission: find Sierra.